To tonight's masterclass on botrytis. A very exciting evening talking about rot, which I'm always very keen to do. My name is Matthew Horsley. I'm one of the buyers at the Wine Society. I buy the wines of Greece, Hungary, and England. So I have some experience in buying nobly rotted wine, particularly from Tokai, but also have a pretty good insight into the negative impacts of botrytis as well, dealing with fairly marginal, cool, wet regions such as England. So I'm your host this evening. Behind the scenes, we've got Mahesh, who's going to be making sure I don't do anything totally stupid, because it's been a while since I've done one of these on my Todd. And so any issues, just drop them a message. Please use the chat function. I believe this is where I say, make sure that you message all people rather than just yourself or me. If you want to ask a question or say hello, do let us know what you are drinking. Hopefully it is something sweet. Hopefully it is something impacted by botrytis. I'll be tasting 3 wines, which hopefully you will have seen on the website. So we've got a Coteaux de Layon, got a Tokai, and we've got a Sauternes, which I'll be getting to at the end. And so if you have any of those bottles, please let me know. But of course, if you've got any questions about anything else, ideally on botrytis, that would be absolutely fine. Just drop it in the Q&A and Mahesh can give me a shout at an appropriate time. So normally you've got Anna, but as I'm sure you may know, Anna doesn't work at the Wine Society anymore. So you've got me filling in. She normally does a pretty epic presentation, whereas mine is fairly boring with lots of pictures of rotten berries. So let's crack on. Hopefully, why isn't my screen changing? Oh, there we go. Such an amateur. Okay, so it would be a pretty good idea to give a background on what botrytis actually is. So in its simplest terms, botrytis is a soft rot that impacts grape varieties and fruit and other plants as well. And whilst it is the blight of many viticulturalists across the world, it does happen in the perfect time, in the perfect place, with the perfect variety, where this does impact the grapes to produce some of the world's most famous sweet wines. For a bit more detail, because this is a masterclass, botrytis cinerea, which is its scientific name, it belongs to a necrotrophic group of pathogens being an organism which takes over or gives disease to its host. And these break down the plant cells, mainly the skins, and these stop the grape producing hyphae, which collectively are mycelia, which are responsible for the structure of grapes and grape cells. And botrytis is present in vineyards, it's present in gardens, it's present in forests. And so once you've got it, it's pretty hard to get rid of. And so really it's about prevention and dealing with it if and when you do have it. It's actually enters the grapes far earlier than a lot of people might think. And so it can get into the bunches and into the berries from a pretty early point, mainly brought about from early season or pre-harvest rain or increased atmospheric pressure. And once in the bunch, typically pretty much before the grape is truly formed and starts ripening after veraison, it becomes latent and it really waits until the grape starts ripening fully to really wreak havoc on the actual grapes. In terms of its attack on the vine, it does impact leaves, it does impact the vine, but its main aim are the berries, starting predominantly with the skins, as I've mentioned. And so once the grapes start ripening, the I've got a picture here, which is I find quite useful just to give an idea of the structure of grapes. So the first thing really to go is this waxy cuticle, which is the extreme outer layer of the grapes. That covers up the epidermis and the grape skins. And during ripening, so pretty much after veraison, which is when the grapes change color and ripening truly starts, the cuticle starts shrinking. And by doing so, it increases the formation of micropores or wounds within the epidermis, that main layer of skin. And really the skin's main function is protection from oxidation, from pests, from diseases. And so once that epidermis is fractured, it allows access for all manner of horrible things. So once those cracks are formed, it allows the conidia, which is the spores of this fungus, to penetrate into the grape, and it starts feeding on all of these delicious nutrients which have started to be produced within the grape's flesh. And once it's inside, these spores release enzymes, typically lacase, which further breaks down the berry's cells. And really importantly, it changes the composition of the juice within inside the berry as well. And by breaking down these cells and having broken that protective seal, there's an increase in evaporation because there's access to the elements. And so typically during ripening season, it's going to be quite warm. And so with these gaps through to the outer world, so to say, there's increase in evaporation, which leads to incredibly concentrated berries. Now, this is a really crucial time. So in dry conditions, which is what we all hope for at that time, the rot will attack the leaves and other parts. Sorry, in dry conditions, when the berry is at full maturity and there's no more ripening to be done, the vascular connections between the vine and the berry stop, which means that the water within the grape, again assuming it's dry and there's no rain, isn't being replaced, which means that the fruit inside is getting even more concentrated because that water isn't being replaced. And so that's concentrating the sugar, it's concentrating flavor, and also really importantly, it's concentrating the acid within the fruit as well. It's not increasing the acid, but the ratio of acid to sugar, etc., is becoming greater. And so the influence of the acid is even more. But also really importantly, that increase in sugar, it actually stops the functionality of the spores of the enzymes, and so the decay stops, and then it's just a matter of getting even more concentrated over time. But if it's wet, then that water, rather than not being replaced, that water is remaining inside the berries, which means that the spores can continue to function, rot can continue to be impacting the grape, and basically it just keeps on going and going until the grape is basically destroyed and the mold kind of takes over. And that's where we see, or what we call, grey rot, which is kind of the negative side of the known noble rot. So really those conditions are fairly essential. Here's some, I promised, pictures of moldy grapes, and here we are. I'm just going to move my big face out of the way because I can't see on the right. So yeah, on the left and in the middle, you've got varying stages of botrytis. And I think it's really interesting on the left-hand picture, the cutting away of the bunch, all of those spores like spraying out of the berry. And so it shows just how easily botrytis can spread even into healthy bunches or remain in the vine where it can over winter as well and impact the following year. In the middle, you can see those kind of shrunken, shriveled berries where all that evaporation has gone, and you're left with these really intense, shriveled, incredibly flavoursome, incredibly sweet grapes. But then on the right, we've got grey rot. So you can see it's totally taken over the vine. The berries are still pretty fat and plump, so they're still filled with water. And that's just, that's irretrievable, really. It looks pretty horrendous. Right. Conditions for botrytis. So where are we finding botrytis? Where is it good? Where is it bad? So I know, boring slides with words. Ugh. Anyway, I'll try and keep this brief and then we can taste some wine. Temperature is really important. Around 18 degrees C is ideal. Certainly at the time of main botrytis growth, which is for the Northern Hemisphere, kind of late September, October time, around 18 degrees C is pretty standard. Proximity to a body of water, super important, because that helps bring the moisture in the morning, which, as we'll see in a second, is really important for the development of botrytis. And so typically the most famous producing areas of botrytis sweet wine are in the proximity of a major body of water, whether that's an important river like the Loire, or it's a lake, something that is going to help increase humidity and also provide moisture for the berries to promote rot. And that cycle of humidity, dew, and frequent morning fogs is super essential, because what you're really looking for is cool, moist mornings, certainly cool overnight because it helps retain acidity. Nice amount of water on the berries in the morning, mainly from fogs, also maybe a little bit of rain, and then really importantly, sunny and windy afternoons to help dry those berries. And it's almost like every night where there's moisture, the berries are kind of soaking up all this goodness, and then it's all being evaporated out, just leaving even more concentrated flavors and sugars within the berry, which is fantastic. But obviously, if it's cool, wet, not that windy in the afternoon, that's where you're going to get grey rot. Grape varieties is hugely important. So the super susceptible grape varieties, some like Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin, and Furment, typically quite thin-skinned, which allows the rot to take hold of the berries far easier than thicker-skinned berries like Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon. Not mentioned red yet, but botrytis in red wine doesn't really work. Nobody really wants it. I'm sure there have been tests done on botrytized red wines, but I've never tasted one. I don't think I've ever seen one commercially available. And so typically it's seen as a big no-no for red wines. Inducing noble rot is quite an interesting one. There has been work on impacting grapes still on the vine to produce botrytis. But there can be quite a lot of issues with that, supposedly, like too high increase in volatile acidity from acetic acid development, and also it's if the climate doesn't allow it, don't force it. But there has been quite a lot of trials in once the grapes have been harvested, so fresh healthy grapes have been harvested in the winery, putting them in a room with similar climatic conditions where they can create the ideal environment for botrytis to develop. Supposedly that does work very well, but it is incredibly expensive. So again, probably not really worth it. So they're the ideal conditions for botrytis to develop. Certainly in England, where we do typically get quite wet harvest periods, it's typically a bad thing. But there are some hybrid varieties, I think, which do produce some pretty good botrytized sweet wines because they can handle it a bit better. What does it smell and taste like? Let's go into that before we go into some of the more specific regions.
Matt,
yes,
we had a question on the pictures that you showed. Can you kind of give a guidance on the timelines between the three different stages?
Thanks. Oh God. To be honest, they're all very similar stages. The one on the left and the one in the middle are probably a couple of weeks apart. I must admit, I just hoarded these from the internet, and so I don't know too much about the specific wines in question. It was more just a visual cue. But I mean, these are all ready to harvest. As you can see on the left-hand side, they are being harvested at that time. So if it's Northern Hemisphere, then I imagine September, October time. The other berries look like they're shriveled a little bit more, so probably mid to late October. And then the ones on the right are, you know, they're gone. So probably October time again.
Great, thank you.
Great. Right. What does it smell and taste like? It's for anyone who hasn't tried botrytis wine. Hopefully, this gives you an idea. For me, the big cue is marmalade. So I've got a little Pennington bear there who loves his marmalade. It's that really intense orange, rindy, peely smell and taste. Ginger is another one I get a lot, particularly with ferment and Tokai, because I find that ferment gives quite a gingery taste anyway. And so, yeah, that for me is a pretty big cue. A lot of other people talk about honey and beeswax, which is absolutely true. So there's a compound called phenylacetaldehyde, which you can find in buckwheat, I believe, which also has a similar smell and is found in botrytized wines, and so it has that kind of buckwheaty, honey, sweet flavor. And then a couple more random ones. My delightful colleague Sarah Knowles, who is a master of wine, she always says like really clean button mushrooms as a sign for her for botrytis, and also I've heard rubber gloves as well. I don't quite know where I found that picture, but hopefully I won't get a message from Adrian because I did find it on my work laptop. So yeah, before I go into some of the other some of the more specific wines, I think it's probably also just worth mentioning about, you know, what to do to avoid botrytis, because that is super important. I've mentioned about how it gets into the grapes and how it can be a positive influence, but preventing it in the vineyard is pretty much the best way. It's really essential to keep airflow going throughout the vines. And so if you're just planting a vineyard, then making sure that the rows are open to winds, opening up canopies to make sure there's good airflow, maybe raising the fruiting zone so it's a little bit higher off the ground, using thicker skinned varieties. As we mentioned, there are some which are naturally more susceptible to botrytis, or varieties with less tight bunches, because I'm sure you would imagine with really super tight bunches, there's less airflow, there's less penetration from various sprays, which may help stop fungal infection. And so grape bunches or varieties typically with looser bunch formations is super important. Planting away from hedgerows or forests, as I mentioned, botrytis does overwinter. And so if you're planting right next to a hedgerow where like strawberries are being planted, I'm sure you've all walked along and seen strawberries which ripen typically, I believe, earlier than grapes, covered in mold. That's going to blow straight through into the vineyard. And so I know there are certainly quite a lot of producers in England, I know the Hattingley Valley are one, who stop their rows quite far away from hedgerows to stop that influence of botrytis coming into the vineyard. And spraying is really, copper is your friend when it comes to fungal diseases in the vineyard. So it's tough for heavy organic viticulture to avoid stuff like botrytis, and also disposing of vine matter after the season is done as well, again to stop that overwintering process and the cycle going into the next day. In terms of in the winery, sometimes you just can't avoid botrytis. If there's a freak shower a few days before you plan harvesting, then it might impact, and there may be some botrytis which you just need to deal with in the winery. Separating the moldy fruit obviously would be great. If you can just chuck it away, great. You could keep the must or juice cold until fermentation starts to inhibit the activity of the lacase, which is that enzyme which helps oxidize the wine as well. It makes it go brown and pretty unpleasant. So keeping it chilled to stop that happening. You can inoculate with trusted yeasts to make sure that your ferment is going ahead clean and simply with non-native yeasts, I suppose. Avoiding the use of enzymes. A lot of winemakers might use bacteriolytic enzymes to break down berries to increase yield. Want to avoid that because it will again break down the skins where the infection is, so you just get more of those flavors. As I said, for red wine it just doesn't work. Chuck it away, it'd be horrible. And again, sulfur is your friend. Prevent microbial growth and oxidation, super important. Or make sweet wines, because not only does it help and give really super complex flavors, but also, this is really nerdy and really geeky, but there's one of the impacts of botrytis is typically a higher volatile acidity, which is basically acetic acid in the wine, which gives like a high toned kind of pre-vinegar stage, but it can add complexity in certain styles of wine. The legal limit for botrytized sweet wines is higher than for table wines. So I think it's 1.5 grams per litre volatile acidity in sweet wines, and it's 1.2 in whites. And so if you have high levels of VA and you've got loads of sugar, make sweet wine, not dry. That's enough of the geeky stuff. Let's try some wine. Yes. So I thought I've really just chosen 3 key wines, and I'm going to taste them kind of, in my opinion, going up in botrytis impact. If you have any of these wines, please shout, or if there is anything that I haven't covered in the general botrytis bit. If that was too technical, not technical enough, then shout. Okay, so the first wine I mentioned we're going to look at is Coteaux de Layon, which is an area in the Loire. And so this is 100% Chenin Blanc. I've got the bottle here. It's in a lovely little, I think it's 50 centilitres. Yes. So I'm going to just pour myself a little bit. I've not actually tasted. I'll pour a little bit more so you can see what sort of colour it is in the glass. Because as I mentioned, botrytis wines typically are a little bit browner. So there we are in the glass. That's fairly golden. It looks really rather inviting. And so, as you'd expect, this is 100% Chenin Blanc, which is susceptible to botrytis, not quite so much as Semillon. But Chenin has one fantastic thing up its sleeve, which is also what ferment has, which is amazingly fresh, vibrant acidity, which helps keep balance on the palate, which is so important when you're dealing with pretty high levels of residual sugar. So this is from a Premier Cru area called Chaume, which is, I believe, just outside of Angers in the Loire. So right off the Loire River. So that's our body of water that we were needing. And the appellation requirements for Coteaux de Layon, and in particular Chaume, because it has its own appellation requirements, I believe it's a minimum of 272 grams per litre of must at must stage. So that's prior to fermentation, with a minimum of 12% alcohol. And the final wine's minimum residual sugar has to be 68 grams per litre. However, with this particular area, if the must is over 323 grams per litre without chaptalization, then you only need to have 11% alcohol. So this is 11% alcohol, rather than 12, the typical minimum requirements. And so this probably does show, considering the must sugar is 323 minimum, that this is later harvested, probably a little bit more botrytis than typical. I don't think there has to be botrytis in Coteaux de Layon, which makes it quite difficult to get an idea of the style, but typically there is some botrytis at least. And yeah, so late harvested, mix of botrytis and non-botrytis, and so it should have a nice balance between freshness, lovely appley Chenin Blanc flavors, as well as some of those marmalade-y botrytis characters that we're really looking for. In terms of wine making, this spends 12 months in 12 hectolitre oak vats, so ginormous oak vats, so very little oak influence, but also some 830-litre oak barrels. I couldn't get any information as to whether there was any new oak, but maybe we'll get some on the nose and palate, and I'll give you a shout if I think there is. It doesn't smell like there's any new oak, as far as I'm aware. So really, this is a very pure expression of Chenin Blanc with a little bit of botrytis. In terms of the residual sugar of the wine, it's got 160 grams per litre. Total acidity 4.4 grams. If you're interested, why you would be, I don't quite know. And yeah, it's 11%. Right, I'm going to shut up for a second and I'm going to taste it. Yeah, for those obviously that don't have it, I'm definitely getting some nice VA volatile notes on it. It's almost like a slightly sour dried apple note, and that kind of lovely apple crumble combination. There's definitely kind of like a tarte tatin sort of caramel apple sort of smell to it, but you don't really pick up any oak, and there smells like a little bit of a slightly raisiny sultana, which makes me again kind of confirm like the super late harvested, slightly kind of dried berries on the vine. Who knows, maybe there is a bit of new oak. There's a little bit of kind of vanilla pod on the palate, which is really rather nice. But definitely when you taste it, I don't know if you can see in the glass, I don't know why I'm putting it there, you can see the legs. Normally I wouldn't talk about legs, but with botrytis, there's an increase in glycerol in the wines, and so you get this really unctuous, oily, textured, slightly viscous palate, which again is a good throwaway or kind of easy to identify thing when it comes to botrytis. If anyone's tasting wines blind, then it's quite a nice giveaway that there might be some botrytis, because it is really quite thick. But we'll get on to more thick with the Sauternes, which is the third wine, because that's really very glycerol-y. But the palate's super fresh. It's got 160 grams per litre of sugar, but the acidity is really elegant and it really lifts the sugar nicely. So it's in no way cloying at all. And it's super long. I mean, I'm still tasting it and I'm salivating, and I just kind of want to have another sip, really. Any questions about this wine? Mahesh, help.
Nothing on this wine, Matt. I've got
Good.
a question on SGN, but I think you can come to that later if you like.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Right, we can move on. Right, what have we got next? I'm more on to terra firma with the next wine, because it's one that I buy. So Tokai. I don't actually have a spittoon, and so apologies, but I'm going to have to actually just finish this. Silly me, it is Thursday, and so I'm allowed to do that, I suppose. Right, Tokai. A lot of people might think that Tokai is kind of the home or the birthplace of botrytis. Whether that's true or not, I'm not too sure. I was reading a book the other day. I think it's more of a German thing, originating in the Mosel, perhaps. But anyway, so this is Tokai, which was described. I mean, it's a style of wine, Arzu, that's been around for centuries, absolutely centuries. I mean, the good old Sun King Louis XIV described it as the wine of kings and the king of wines, and so it's been around for a bloody long time. And it's probably, well, it's from Tokai, which is in the kind of the northeast area of Hungary, and it's the confluence of traditionally the number of petunios was the amount of arzu, which are the botrytized berries, picked and put into 27-liter wooden botugni, which are these buckets, basically. And the number of petunios was the number of those 27-liter buckets of botrytized berries that you would put into the wine. Right, so 4, 5, 6, whatever. Nowadays, it's not that anymore. It's not quite that romantic. It's actually now just done on minimum sugar, and so and it's just 5 and 6 petunios now. So 5 petunios is a minimum of 120 grams per liter of sugar. 6 petunios is a minimum of 150 grams per liter of sugar. But what makes it even more confusing is that this is 5 petunios, but it's got 156, 158 grams per liter of sugar. So it could be a 6 petunios, but it's not, because they've decided to name it 5 petunios. But they do have 6 petunios wines, which are even sweeter. And then there's the legendary Essentia wine, which is rare as hen's teeth, incredibly expensive, and that's made exclusively from the free run juice from the arzu berries. It's incredibly sweet. The minimum residual sugar for Essentia is 450 grams per liter, which is insane. I have had an Essentia when I was in Tokai last year, which apparently was 820 grams per liter of sugar, and it was 1.5% alcohol, because the yeasts just cannot cope with the amount of sugar, and they just give up. And it was amazing. You have it on a little teaspoon in the morning. It used to be prescribed as medicine because of its supposedly life-giving attributes. And I'll tell you what, after a few too many beers the night before, it certainly gave me a new lease of life. So it was just what I needed. But yeah, it's around 2 to 3 liters per 100 kg of arzu berries, approximately, that you get for the Essentia. So it's crazy. But the Tokai is made in quite a unique way, because the berries are so intense and so dried and so concentrated. By pressing them, you're not getting any juice, really. And so you have 2 separate harvests. You have a primary harvest of non-botrytized berries, which you harvest, you ferment until about 4 or 5 degrees, and then you chill it, and then you wait. You harvest your botrytized berries in a number of passes once botrytis takes on, and then you are bringing those arzu berries into the winery, and then you're macerating them in the base wine that you've already created for about 48 hours to extract all those sugars, all those flavors. And then fermentation recommences until about 10 or 11%. I think this is 11%. The grapes are pressed before finishing fermentation, and then the wine is transferred into small 300 or 500 litre, typically new Hungarian oak. Hungarian oak, to me, gives a much spicier style of wine, with quite little oxygen ingress. So it's quite a tight seal, very spicy impact, but it's super important that it's Hungarian oak and it's new, and they stay in there for about 2 years. And so, yeah, right. Let me grab myself a glass. Don't know if you could probably see, this is a lot paler. The previous wine was 2018. This is 2017, so still very youthful. Why it's paler, I don't know, to be perfectly honest. Maybe less impact of botrytis, maybe careful handling, maybe fermentation was in stainless steel, the primary, whereas the show might have been in large oak. So who knows? But it's a lot paler in the glass, and my bottle's a little bit reductive. There's a little bit of sulfury stink, so I'm just going to swish it around a bit. But the main character of Tokai, the arzu wines, is low alcohol, so 11%, and really high bracing acidity. And so the Coteaux de Layon was also 11% alcohol, also has roughly 160 grams per litre of sugar. This has got 158. And so what's the difference between them? The Coteaux de Layon, although quite high in acidity, I think I mentioned it was 4.4 grams per litre of total acidity. This has got 7.9. And so this is super fresh, much higher acidity. And also it's the influence of oak as well. You know, you smell this and there's loads of that spicy, creamy, savory oak to it alongside those marmalade flavors. And I'd also guess that the percentage of botrytized berries in the Tokai is far greater than in the Coteaux de Layon.
And Matt, while you're tasting, we had a question on temperature of the botrytis wines. Is there an ideal temperature? And that's from Svetlana.
In what context? Sorry, is in growing them or
no, for serving temperatures, please.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I would say not too cold. 12, 14 degrees would be fine.
Is there a difference between the wines that we're tasting, or would you say that all
temperature wise?
Yeah.
12 to 14, I think would be absolutely fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any colder, and I think you'd mute some of the aromas.
Yeah.
But a little bit too warm, and they might get a bit more cloying. And so, 12, 14 degrees would be absolutely fine, I think.
Right. Thank you.
But yeah, the botrytis impact on this on the palate for me is so much stronger. I know my tasting note there says pineapple. It really is those kind of pineapple sugary sweets that you may have gotten in the sweet shop as a kid. It's super intense pineapple, lots of ginger, definitely oak as well, but not overt. It's molded nicely in with the wine, and I find that when we get to this Sauternes in a bit, that is opulent oak, and so this is a lot more restrained. Body is kind of fairly medium. It does have some glycerol, but it's not weighty, mainly because of the ABV being only 11. So it's really light and it's delicate, and it kind of dances really nicely on the palate, and that acidity just creates this lovely lift. Yeah, that's really nice. I know I'm the Hungarian buyer, so I'm slightly biased, but I think Tokai is so much nicer than Sauternes. I think I just find it much more drinkable. But don't get me wrong, I love Sauternes, and so I'll never turn it down. But Tokai is super smart, and this will age for donkeys because of that acidity, because of that sugar, both natural aging things, and so that will be good for 10, 15, 20 years. And in terms of kind of development and flavor, I've been lucky enough to try some old Tokai. They go pretty black in color. They almost look like treacle, and they do develop slightly kind of walnutty, much more kind of almost like burnt orange flavors, and they're fascinating. But because of the acidity, they keep so nice and fresh. I'm hoping to do some more Tokai by the end of this year, some Christmassy things where hopefully I'll look into some single vineyard stuff, because there's some really exciting single vineyard work going on in Tokai, just to look a little bit more in focus in particular regions. But yeah, this is from the Raw Tokai Company, which are one of the top producers in Tokai, and it's really nice. Cool. So we've got 20 minutes left. So.
Got a couple of quick questions on there for you, please, Matthew.
Yeah, fire away.
Okay, so, I mean, first of all, we had a couple of comments on the Coteaux de Layon, which I've left in the chat for you to pick up later, but some really interesting stuff there.
Questions or just comments?
Comments, actually.
Great.
On those. I have got one question going back to Coteaux de Layon, first of all, from Francis. My Coteaux de Layon shown is a Chateau Souchery from the Wine Society. What is the difference in the wines from the Chaume area as opposed to from the Coteaux de Layon? This is going back to the first wine. Do you know the answer?
So it's my assumption. I haven't tried that many, but my assumption, because it's a Premier Cru area, because you have Chaume, and then you have Quatre de Chaume, which is a quarter of Chaume, which is another, I think it's Grand Cru area, and then you've got Bonnezeau, which is the other super premium Coteaux de Layon area. In terms of differences within Chaume, I guess it would just be producer differences. There's some may age for oaken longer, some may have more botrytis. I believe that the minimum residual sugar levels between Coteaux de Layon and Chaume is higher, I believe. But within the area, I doubt there's that much difference. They'll all be partly botrytized, probably aged in large oak. I doubt they're using too much new oak or small oak, and all 100% chenin. So just be producer differences, I'm guessing. Hopefully that answers that question.
And just a couple of comments on the Tokai. So one is Tokai seems very traditional. Is it changing? Is there a new wave? And that's from John.
Yeah. Yes and no. The nice thing about it is that it's a fairly unique production method, and it does seem to work very well. And so in terms of wine making, there's not much change. As I slightly alluded to, the really exciting stuff in Tokai in terms of Arzu wines, the sweet wines, are the single vineyard expressions. And so whether it's Betchek or Kirali or anywhere like that, that people are looking specifically at certain areas of Tokai as a region and giving really exciting single vineyard expressions, which are unbelievably concentrated, unbelievably unctuous, and really rather wonderful, and they will age for a very long time. So for me, that's where the exciting stuff is with Arzu wine. For Tokai as a region, really the exciting stuff and the growth area is dry Tokai, which we've done quite a lot of, and it's resonated really well with members. But for sweet wine, cleaner winemaking, better use of barrels, single vineyard expressions, and I think over the next few years, it'll be interesting to see what people do with the lower sugar expressions. Now that the legal minimum for 5 Petunios is 120 grams per litre, and there's this kind of chasm underneath, it'll be interesting to see what people do, who maybe takes advantage of drier styles, and who knows, we might see a wine later this year which explores that.
And just as an addition, John's added about Royal Tokai readily available. Not many other producers. Is there any other producers in that new wave that we should be looking at?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I buy. Let's go back to it just so you can see it. I buy the Royal Tokai at the moment because, for me, it's probably the best value Arzu, and for me, I think 5 Petunios is the best style because it's nice and balanced. But yes, there is a fabulous producer called Istvan Balassa, who if anyone's tried some of the dry ferments we've done, he does the Marty McFly ferment, which I released last year, which is so good. That's been really popular. So he's actually the head viticulturalist at Royal Tokai, but owns some of his own, or at least leases some of his own vineyards, and some of the kind of Grand Cru sites as well. And so I'm hoping to buy some of his sweet wines because they are super impressive. But also some of the more premium Royal Tokai expressions are just incredible. Like, they are so good, but they are expensive. And so testing the waters a little bit, because I say it to a lot of people that we have quite a traditional membership, as a lot of people know, and so a lot of people are Sauternes, Barsac, Montbazillac, if they want a slightly more affordable expression. So actually getting people into Tokai can be quite difficult. It's quite expensive, but I'm hoping to to release some pretty exciting single vineyard and more premium expressions later this year.
Great. And just one comment for interest here. The bottle of Tokai is hard to get into. I'm not sure what it's sealed with.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so there is a wax seal, but it's a very thin wax seal with almost like a kind of light plastic thing. Why, I don't know. The best thing to do is just drive your cork straight through the top. Drive your corkscrew straight through the top of it. Any wax seal you see on the top of a bottle, don't be picking it. Don't be freezing it. Just get your corkscrew and just open it as you would a normal bottle without a foil on it, and that should just break away, and it will naturally push the wax away from going in the bottle. But yeah, I agree, it's pretty annoying, and it meant I couldn't caravan the bottle, so I've had to open it, and I'll sip it over the next few days. So yeah, cool. Any others?
That's it for now. Thank you.
Great. Sauternes. So, in my dinky little half bottle. So this is the Ulysse Casabon. There you go. Don't think you could see that very well. There's a picture of it there. That's much easier. Color-wise, a little bit pretty similar to the Royal Tokai, and kind of like a bright gold, we'll call it, rather than a mid gold. Bright lemony gold. Cool. So Sauternes, as I'm sure most people know, just outside of Bordeaux, confluence again of two rivers. I think it's the Garonne and the Citran, something like that. Anyway, again, it's those confluence of those two rivers which are creating that change in temperature, which is bringing about that fog. Here, the blend traditionally is Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. Semillon is very susceptible to botrytis, and so typically that's the lion's share. And then Sauvignon Blanc adds wonderful acidity. As anyone who drinks Sauvignon Blanc knows, it's pretty acidic, and so it adds freshness. But also you can use Muscadel as well, which adds a nice bit of florality as well to the wines, which again is used in tiny portions and really just kind of as a bit of seasoning. And this wine is a bit of a mystery, and so a lot of it's going to be done on just general taste rather than factual stuff, because this is it's a wine that we buy which is from a top estate in Sauternes. We can't say who, because they basically and other people, we've done like Ulysse Reds as well, where it's basically declassified wines which haven't quite made the grade for their top wines, whether it's a set of barrels or perhaps a particular part of the vineyard, which they believe isn't quite good enough to go into their top wine. So they declassify it, bottle it under a different label, sell it through a négoce like Ulysse Casabon, with the pretense that their name isn't mentioned because they don't want people to see their second or declassified wine sell for considerably lower than their top wine. This is the second release that we've done of this wine. The previous release was a blend of 3 vintages, and it was unbelievably good. I'll have no qualms saying that was insanely good. This is really good, but that was insanely good. So I think that was a blend of 14, 15, and 16. This is a single vintage wine, so I can only assume it's either 17 or 18, which were good vintages in Sauternes. Not incredible, but good enough. And in terms of production of Sauternes, this is where the style is different to Tokai and the majority of other botrytized wines, in the high proportion of botrytized berries, again obviously late harvested. A lot of people are kind of freezing berries or chilling berries way down overnight to get a little last bit of extraction out, or a last little bit of freezing of the water to make them even sweeter. Fermentation in small, so 2 to 5 litre new, typically French oak barrels. So this is where we see the real oak influence hit through. French oak often gives kind of vanilla-y, cedary spice, really quite opulent. And fermentation goes through until about 13.5, sometimes even 14.5 degrees, with the resulting sugar level at around between 110 and 150. What this is, I don't know. I'll have a taste in a second and I'll give you a stab. This is 13.5%, so it's it's moderate for Sauternes. Often, whenever if I'm blind tasting, it's opulent oak, it's high alcohol, 14.5%, and really weighty, viscous, intense. On the nose, it doesn't smell dissimilar to the Tokai. It's maybe a little bit oakier, it's a little bit richer, it's a little bit more kind of buttery. I don't know whether Sauternes actually goes through mallow, but if it does, then that might explain some of the kind of diacetyl-y buttery notes. Yeah, right away that glycerol is thick. It is mouth coating. The acidity is still super fresh, which is nice. That Sauvignon, I think, is coming through really nicely. You get a slight kind of herbaceous character, kind of lifting the palate nicely, but it is unctuous, and the alcohol is definitely warming. Whereas the Tokai, you don't even notice alcohol. This is like some definite warming bits at the back of your cheek and back of your throat. The oak is pretty prominent. Lots of marmalade, lots of burnt orange peel, lots of kind of toasty limes. It's really very, very good. Hopefully you've all tried Sauternes before. If you haven't, try some. We have an exhibition Sauternes, which is technically a Barsac. Barsac can be a Sauternes, but Sauternes can't be a Barsac. Barsac's maybe a little bit more floral, maybe not quite so intense, a lot prettier, and Sauternes is typically a little bit richer, a little bit more unctuous, a little more tropical. Cool. I'm conscious we've only got 7 minutes left. God, I do talk, don't I? Questions?
We do have one or two people who've got the 14.5% one that you mentioned, so the first bottling, and are saying how lovely that is, so that's nice. Excuse me, if I can just go back. Phil asked a question then. He says, hi Matt, Alsace, SGN, easy to see there is a requirement for noble rot, but where does Vendange Tardive stand with a requirement for noble rot? From my researches, there does not appear to be any required level of noble rot grapes in the VT wines, but it is clearly there. Is it just a case of good fortune year on year, where the actual level of varies from very low levels upwards?
I believe so. Vendange Tardive simply means late harvest, and so whether there's botrytis or not, I believe is just a yearly thing. It's possible there's botrytis. It'll depend, year, producer, vineyard, grapes as well, because it can be different grape varieties for Alsace, Vendange Tardive, and SGN as well. I'm not too sure which ones are most susceptible to it. I assume that Pinot Gris is probably the most susceptible, just because I seem to get quite a lot of kind of slightly botrytized Pinot Gris in my life. But Vendange Tardive typically is far less sweet. Vendange Tardive, as far as I'm aware, kind of goes up to about 90 to 100 grams per litre of sugar, whereas SGN, which is botrytized berries, goes up to like 400. And so that's kind of most of what I know in terms of that. If that makes sense.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
In terms on the Sauternes, I haven't got any other questions currently for you.
Okay, that's good. That's fine.
Yeah.
What do you eat it with? The French would eat it with foie gras, but depending on your ethical sway, you may want to have something slightly kinder. I've got a lemon tart in the fridge, which isn't going to be my dinner, but it will be my pudding, which this will go very nicely with. That kind of lemon cut would be very, very nice. You know, cheese is a pretty typical combination with it. Kind of blue cheese, bries, Stiltons, be very, very nice. But we've also done in the past, back in my other life in the tastings team, done Sauternes dinners where we've had Sauternes with every course. That might sound incredibly gluttonous, which it is, but it actually worked really well. And getting different styles, different vintages, it actually can balance a meal quite well. You definitely need to lie down by the end of it, and maybe a run the next day, but it is doable. Whether it should be done, I don't know. Any others?
We've got a couple of comments, some nice comments, and some people saying they prefer the French wines. Some like the balance in the Sauternes, but different things coming through on that for you in the chat.
Well, yeah, someone saying pate. Pate would be very nice. Yeah. What other styles could people drink? Ausbruck from Austria. It's very famous. Kracher is a fantastic producer. I don't think we sell it, but Kracher, very good.
Yeah, Kath saying the Colston Bassett Stilton that she's got's gone very well with the Coteaux de Layon.
That sounds absolutely perfect. I'm just reading some of the comments now. Great. Well, I suppose if there's no more comments, you have 3 minutes back, and you can start your 6-course Sauternes dinner early. Great, thank you very much. Hopefully that was interesting. It is available on YouTube, I believe, so people want to watch it back. I probably will, because I'll forget all of this information as soon as I turn my laptop off, and so I'll need to rewatch it as well. I hope you had a good time. I've really enjoyed it. I'm now going to go and drink some sweet wine. Mahesh, thank you very much. You're a star. Enjoy your football and enjoy your Tokai when you get back. Maybe he's already gone. He's already gone. Great.
I'm here. Thanks, Matthew.
No worries. But everybody, I'll be back next week. I'm doing a Pinot Noir, not Burgundy Pinot Noir masterclass. So,
and I think I'm with you on that one as well. So
great.
I'll see you then.
The dream team are back together. Cool. I'll see you all next week. And we've got tasting packs for those. So if you haven't got one already, I don't know if there's still time, but if there is, get one. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye.